This week on The Destination Angler.
I think that's the biggest challenge for people, particularly in Cheeseman, is just technical. And once you're finding those fish, and then, if they're eating midge pupa higher up in the column, or are they eating mayflies mid-column, or are they chasing swimming baetis where you have to allow it to swing or possibly fish a wet fly? There's so many variables that you just learn, over time on how to adapt to this fishery.
And that was the one and only Pat Dorsey on Colorado Tailwaters. Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haigh. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by Adamsville Fishing Gear, the trusted source for quality fly fishing gear built to last at an affordable price. And by Got Fishing, crafting world-class fly fishing adventures specially designed to your level of experience and budget. And by Trout Routes, the #1 fishing app, helping trout anglers avoid the crowds and explore new public water. Download it today in the App Store and get 20% off using promo code DESTINATION20. Up next on the Destination Angler, we hear part 2 from the one and only Pat Dorsey on Colorado's top tailwaters. Then we take a worldwide tour of top fly fishing destinations with Brian Oakland, founder of Got Fishing. Be sure to backcast to catch the last show on blue lining Idaho's backcountry with award-winning author and expert blue liner himself, Chris Hunt. Chris literally wrote the book on fly fishing Idaho's secret waters, and he breaks down his process for discovering overlooked streams in some of Idaho's fishiest backcountry areas. You won't want to miss these shows, and be sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts and share it with a buddy. And now you can catch the Destination Angler podcast on YouTube. Our destination today is part 1 of a 2-part series on top tailwaters in the great state of Colorado. And our guest is none other than the 30-year veteran fly fishing guide, author, Pat Dorsey, owner of Quill Angler, Evergreen, Colorado. And man, does Pat bring his A-game today, breaking down the technical side of Colorado's best tailwaters, including the South Platte, the Blue, Yampa, Williams Fork, Taylor, Frying Pan, and the Gunnison Gorge. He also tackles big questions like, how do you spot feeding trout, why it's hard to do well in deep pools, and what in the heck is a guide fly? Pat shares his knowledge of winter fishing tactics, sight fishing, and the age-old debate, freestones versus tailwaters. Stick around to the end for some of Pat's out-of-the-box strategies for those tough days on the water we all encounter. Now let's dive in with the master, Mr. Pat Dorsey. All right, folks. Well, we've got a real treat today. We have the one and only Pat Dorsey on the line here. And so our destination is actually, it's going to be Colorado because we're with Pat, but it's the top tailwaters of Colorado. And Pat is the head guide. I love that. He's a co-owner of Quill Angler Fly Shop in Evergreen, Colorado, but he's also the head guide. So he doesn't want to let go of that guiding thing. I got a feeling.
No, I love it.
You love the guidance. So, folks, in Colorado is just absolutely loaded with tailwaters, and many famous tailwaters, trout streams are there. The South Platte system, the Frying Pan, Williams Fork, the Taylor, many more. Breathtaking scenery, wily trout. We're going to ask Pat if some of these tailwaters are easier to fish than others. Pat, you grew up in Colorado, didn't you?
Yeah, born and raised in Littleton, Colorado, and just spent a lot of time fishing with my father. He was a school teacher, and so that afforded us the luxury of being able to fish hard during the summer months. So
yeah, okay,
kid.
That's neat. I know you're a teacher at heart too, from what I've seen and read about you. So you've been guiding for 30 years? Is that right?
Yeah, 32 years.
32, and I read you spend over 200 days a year on the water. That sounds like a guide who's pretty busy.
Yeah, I used to spend. I'm not doing it as much anymore. I finally decided to slow down a little bit. I'm still
come on.
Guiding 5 days a week. I'm trying to take weekends off, but that is a lot of times I'll have a customer that wants to go out, so I'll take them out on a Saturday or something. But I'm really, really trying to just keep it to 5 days a week right now.
Dialing it back a little bit, and yet you were in Oklahoma City being a guest speaker there, right?
Yeah, I just got back from Oklahoma City. I'm flying to Seattle on Tuesday to do a gig up there for a club, and then I'm heading to the fly fishing show in Bellevue, Washington. So got a busy week. And
Yeah, man. Wintertime. Are you busier in the winter than you are in the summer? It sounds like you might be.
in the old days, there used to be a season, kind of an off season in
Right.
the winter. But now with show season, it keeps me pretty much, traveling every week. I've already been to New Jersey, and I just got back from Atlanta last week, and we're off to Seattle, and then we got the big Denver show here. So that's the biggest
Yeah,
show in the country.
that's in your backyard. You can just drive to that one, huh?
Yep, be nice to sleep in my own bed.
There you go. Well, exactly. I'll see you at that show. I'm going to go to that one. But Pat's also an accomplished fly tyer and author. He's created many patterns of his own, such as the Black Beauty, UV Scud, Top Secret Midge. We're going to find out what the Top Secret Midge is. You might have changed the name. It's not going to be Top Secret anymore after today's podcast, Pat. He's the Southwest field editor of Fly Fisherman magazine. So you've probably read some of his articles in Fly Fisherman if you do read that magazine. Written several books on fly fishing and Colorado, including Fly Fishing Tailwaters and a companion book called Tying and Fishing Tailwater Flies, which is jam-packed with info on how to tie Pat's favorite guide flies. I put that in quotes because I kind of want to know what a guide fly is. And another book called Colorado's Guide Flies. So there's that word again, guide flies. He's a frequent speaker at clubs and shows, and he's a family man. 3 boys, 2 stepchildren, and his wife, Kim, who you just might see alongside Pat at shows, on hosted trips, or maybe even a trout stream. Welcome to the show, Pat.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate being part of it.
Yeah. So what is a guide fly? Is that just an easier fly to tie so you can knock off 30 of them in an evening? What is that?
I think a lot of people say a guide fly is just, quick off the vise, little thread, little wire, little dubbing, but also a guide fly. It could be just a fly that a guide depends upon. It's his money fly. Sometimes, those can be fairly intricate as well. So I think a guide fly has multiple roles.
Okay. And so did you interview like some of the top guides in the state to figure out what those guide flies are? Are those your guide flies?
Well, the 2 different projects, the Colorado guide flies, that's people ask me all the time, what's my favorite project? What was my favorite book to write? And Colorado guide flies was my favorite project because it was a crazy time in my life. I was guiding 5 days a week, and then my buddy Dr. Adams and I hit the road, and we were fishing with a different guide every weekend and eating pizzas in hotel rooms and editing photos to all hours of the night. And then we traveled and fished with the best guides in the state of Colorado, and they were able to provide some tactics and tips that I think their anglers really would benefit from. But also they gave us some of their top producing flies, so it was a really cool project.
Okay. Yeah, I got to talk to a lot of different people, and that sounds really cool. Well, let's dive into the tailwaters of Colorado. Man, Colorado is loaded. Like, how loaded is Colorado? How would you describe that?
We've got world-class tailwaters. I mean, the South Platte's an hour from my house here, and it has the reputation of being just one of the best tailwaters. And there's several sections of the South Platte which even make it even more interesting as well. And then, of course, the frying pan. You travel the country, and everybody's always ranting and raving about the frying pan. It's a great one. And gosh, you toss in the Williams Fork and the Blue and some of these other tail races that we have here. We live in a pretty good state.
Yeah, a pretty darn good state. I would agree. So what would you say, how does Colorado from a tailwater standpoint compare to some of the other states around you out west?
Well, when you start looking at Western tailwaters, I think, you can't not have a tailwater talk about, without talking about the Bighorn or the San Juan River in northern New Mexico and the Green River, and then the South Platte. I think, when you think about, those 4 fisheries right there, those are always ones that are going to surface in a tailwater discussion. And arguably some of the best fisheries in the country, are within an 8-hour drive of us. And then having these fisheries in Colorado, I can get to, the Yampa River, that's 2.5, 3 hours from my house. South Platte, a lot of it's an hour to 2 hours. So, a lot of day trips. We have the endless possibilities here with some really quality waters.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, we'll get into the crowds and whatnot, but let's maybe start with, I'm guessing one of your favorites is the South Platte. I know you spend a lot of time there. And just kind of give us a high level on the South Platte. There's several tailwaters on the South Platte, correct?
There is. And, I always tell everybody, and I bleed Cheeseman Canyon. Cheeseman Canyon is my place, and I do the vast majority of my guiding in the canyon because it's a super technical fishery. And I always tell people if I had one day left to fish, one day left to live, I'd fish Cheeseman Canyon. It's one of the most technically humbling, difficult trout streams, but yet one of the most rewarding trout streams. And it's my home river, so it's the river that I learned on and I grew up on, and I learned more by not catching fish in comparison to catching fish oftentimes. But it's kind of the school of hard knocks, but it makes you a better angler at the end of the day.
Man, so when you go out there, Pat Dorsey goes out there, do you ever have days where you just don't do very well? Does that even happen to you on Cheeseman?
Absolutely. I mean, it happens to everybody. I mean, the thing about fly fishing is you never quit learning, and if you always have to remain open to learning. And I enjoy fishing with other guides and sharing things with them, and they're sharing their insights with me. And I think that's the beautiful thing about our sport is you never really grasp it all. You never really learn it all. And yes, there's days when the South Platte is very forgiving to me, and then there's days where I feel like I got to come home and read my book on the South Platte because it's so brutally tough, and there's a lot of variables that make the South Platte and Cheeseman difficult. The fluctuating flows and pressure and wild trout and small aquatic life. And there's a lot of things that really force me to bring my A game every day.
Do you take all of your customers there, or do you kind of go, okay, this guy's a brand new angler, let's not subject him to Cheeseman, let's go somewhere else?
Most of my customers I take to Cheeseman. There's a few, and it's more so I fish it, spring, and I fish it summer till August, and then I tend to switch over to the Williams Fork in the fall, fish that. But I do a lot of guiding at Deckers in the winter, so it's November to March is kind of my Deckers fishery. Then I start fishing Cheeseman real hard, and then I go into our fall routine, which is Colorado River and the Williams Fork River.
Interesting. So, all right. So, why is Cheeseman so technical? I got a feeling it might have a little bit to do with just fish get pounded there pretty good, gets a good number of people, but why else?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely gets a lot of pressure, and the water's very clear. You're dealing with all wild trout, so it's the aquatic life is very small. A lot of small midges, a lot of small mayflies. So you're fishing 6X tippet, and the fish have always been tough in there, and there's always been that belief amongst South Platte regulars that if you can catch fish at Cheeseman, you can catch them anywhere in the world. Yeah. And it's just one of those fisheries that is very technical, and you just got to hit on all cylinders. It's one of those that makes you earn them, but it's a beautiful fishery, and it has some incredible, gorgeous fish there.
Does it? Okay, rainbows, or what do you got down there?
It's heavy on the rainbow biomass,
okay.
Mainly because of the colder water. There is plenty of brown trout. There's times when you'd swear to God there wasn't a brown trout in the river because there's so much structure. And when those brownies kind of get off the bite, man, that they can hide on you. And, there's a lot of structure. So big boulders and deeper pools and so on and so forth. But it does lean a little bit more towards the rainbow side of things. And then what's beautiful about that is Deckers is more of a brown trout fishery. So if I got a guest that comes in for 2 days, I can show them a world-class rainbow trout fishery in Cheeseman Canyon, and I could show them a beautiful brown trout fishery just by dropping downstream a few miles.
What about 11 Mile?
11 Mile is a nice fishery as well. It's it's very similar to Cheeseman in many ways. It's got rainbows, it's got cutbows and brown trout.
Okay.
Very healthy as well.
Hey anglers, if you're on the hunt for fishing gear that's as tough as you are, look no further than Adams Built Fishing Gear. Since 2014, Adams Built has been the go-to choice for anglers who demand quality without breaking the bank. Their lineup of lightweight waders, high-quality nets, and meticulously designed fly boxes is second to none. But here's what really impressed me. Adams Built stands behind their products like no other. Every single item is guaranteed to last. Yep, you heard that right. And get this, Adams Built waders even come with a lifetime repair or replace guarantee, with you only paying for shipping. Now that's a deal you can't beat. So why settle for gear that won't last? Make the smart choice and gear up with Adams Built Fishing Gear today. Ask your local dealer for Adams Built or visit www.adamsbuiltfishing.com and tell them Steve sent you from the Destination Angler podcast. Here's Brian Oakland, founder of Got Fishing.
There's really no reason for an angler not to use Got Fishing when everything we do for you is free. We have the best trips around the world. We only work with the best outfitters, and we're definitely going to get you the best deal and the best dates guaranteed. That's why we have clients come back time and time again. We have Don with us on this trip. This has been his 6th fishing adventure with Got Fishing, and I think if you asked him, it is because of all the little things. We don't tell people, we ask questions. What is it that you're looking for? What would be most important to you? Who's coming with you? What's your experience level? And really at the end of the day, what is the most important aspect of this experience that you're looking to take home? And then from there, we just marry them up with some of the best lodges, let them take a look at 2 or 3 different options and pick what's going to be best for them.
Well, there you have it, folks. A pretty good case for choosing Got Fishing for your next big adventure. So what are you waiting for? Give Brian a shout or visit gotfishing.com. Give me a sense of what's the water like in Cheeseman? How wide is it? How deep is it? You talked about a lot of boulders. I've seen pictures. I've never been there, but I've seen pictures of it. It looks like it's boulder strewn, so I'm imagining you've got some pocket water you're dealing with. What's it like?
It's a classic boulder strewn canyon. You know, you've got your riffle run pool tail outs, and you've got a lot of nice pocket water, and you've got those really gin clear tail outs. You know, some of the holes, most of the holes are relatively shallow. I'm going to say like a deep hole would be 6-8 feet, but there are a few that are real deep. They call it the narrows. There's a couple that probably are 15 or 20 feet deep, but I tend to fish in water that's 2 to 4 feet deep as a general rule, and try to avoid the pools. The pools is what gets everybody in trouble in there because they see all those fish, but you can't catch them. They're really hard to catch in those pools.
Yeah, what's up with that? How come you can't catch them?
They can see too well, and in those tail outs, they see too well, and a lot of times those fish that are sitting in the back of those pools aren't as active, feeders as the ones that are up in the transitional zones and up in those riffles and runs.
So the guys in the big deep holes, are they feeding? Or they are feeding, but they're just tougher to catch?
They're tougher to catch because there's not a lot of fast water. So the fast water kind of masks your presentation a little bit. And the slower pools, they get a better look at your indicator and your flies and your weight and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, you'd have to go down to, I don't know, do they make 8 or 9X? I don't know. What would you have to do? Well, we'll fish 6. That's about as light as I go. But we'll fish 7 on our dry fly. So if we're fishing some tiny tricos and little tiny olives, from time to time we'll go down to a 7. But most of the time I can get away with 6X on our dries. And typically, as far as nymphing is concerned, just anywhere from 4 to 6X on that too. All the little bugs I'm fishing on 6X. Oh, yeah, okay. And you sent me a video. It was really fascinating of one of your fly boxes, and your flies are tiny, man. I mean, are you over 20, 22s, 24s? How small do you go? Down to a 26, but we fish a lot of 20s in the summer, particularly early season for Baetis. We midsummer brings some PMDs, so we have some bigger mayflies. We can get away with an 18, but 18's pretty big when it comes to midges and mayflies. I mean, a fly that's size 18. We fish some big stuff too, scuds and worms and stoneflies and whatnot. As a general rule, you're fishing 20 and smaller the majority of the time. You are, okay. How's your eyesight? Not very good. Do you thread them before you head out in the morning? How do you do that? I use a pair of cheaters and fish. Like I said, sometimes a size 24 is going to make the difference between catching fish in comparison to a 22. It's just particularly this time of year in the winter, we have to go really, really small. Yeah. So once again, why do you have to go smaller in the winter? Are you matching the hatch, or is the water's just lower and clearer? Why do you have to go smaller? Predominantly imitating midges this time of year. We do have a larger variety of midge we call the gorilla midge or the big spring midge. So that'll start hatching here in the next couple of weeks. So we will be able to fish a little bit bigger midge imitation. But during the dead of winter, we're fishing 22s, 24s, 26s. And mainly that is just to match the hatch. That the fish are keying exclusively on midges, and bigger bugs just don't really fish well. Yeah, interesting. When you get those little flies and you're trying to tie put 6X through a size 24
hole, and then it's full of glue. You really want to strangle the guy that tied it, don't you?
Oh yeah, I don't put any head cement on my flies for that reason.
Oh, you
So
don't on those little ones?
all my midges and mayflies, I just do a whip finish on them and call it good, and try to alleviate, having a clogged eye out on the river.
Yeah, and I read somewhere that you use bigger gap flies too, when you get real small flies. Is that right?
I do. I like that 2488 Tiemco hook. It's
Okay.
got the wide gape, so that's a great hook when you're tying little midges and little mayflies. It just gives you that hook up to landing ratio advantage in comparison to a standard, gaped hook.
Yeah, bumps it up a little bit, because I imagine that's one of the challenges, I would guess, with guiding clients with those tiny little flies, is just getting a hook and a fish, isn't it?
Yeah, and you have to have realistic expectations. You're gonna lose half the fish you hook when
Yeah.
you're going after those big trout on spider web thin tippets. You're gonna break a few off. You're gonna just the fly's gonna slip, and yeah, you lose a lot of fish just because of the nature of the tailwater game and the small flies.
Yeah, are you finding the fish are educated in terms of, just spotting a phony fly, but also once you hook them, they know how to break you off, like, wrap around this rock and that'll be it?
Well, those brown trout are pretty structure oriented. You hook them and they fight completely different than the rainbows. The rainbows are the mighty leapers, and they tend
Yeah.
to take a lot of line and go, and they jump too. But the browns, they like to take you down around the crud and break you off. So,
Yeah.
but they're wild fish. They're strong fish, and everybody says they're smart. They're not smart, but they're instinctive. So you can't get away with a lot of silly mistakes in Cheeseman Canyon. You need to have the right size, the right shape, the right color. And you got to err on the small side if you're going to be successful in there. And then there's no room for a crummy drift either. You got to have a precise dead drift, and then
Yeah.
there's times when you gotta mimic the behavior of the fly in addition to choosing the right fly.
What's the difference between a good angler and a great angler? Or put another way, what's the difference between a good day and a great day as far as what the angler's doing?
I kind of liked your first question. It's a joke in our business. The difference between a good angler and a great angler is often one split shot.
Yeah.
And so, and it's not that far from the truth, because, micromanaging your rig, your nymphing rig, a lot of times you got to be in the right zone. And sometimes during the height of a midge hatch, you can make the mistake of fishing below the fish with too much weight, or there's times when you don't have enough weight. So I think that's the biggest challenge for people, particularly in Cheeseman, is just technical. And once you're finding those fish, and then if they're eating midge pupa higher up in the column, or are they eating mayflies mid column, or are they chasing swimming baetis where you have to allow it to swing or possibly fish a wet fly? There's so many variables that you just learn over time on how to adapt to this fishery.
Are most trout, though, coming up from the bottom? Are you saying that they're actually holding mid column?
Well, when a hatch is in progress, a lot of times, a non-feeding fish is going to be a fish that's kind of hunkered down on the bottom, nailed
Yeah.
down on the bottom. So, and that's not to say that fish is not eating opportunistically and might, take a stonefly or a leech or something like that. So, but I try to avoid fishing to the fish that are nailed down on the bottom, that show no actual signs of feeding. I prefer to look for fish that are suspended in the water column. That way I know that they're actively feeding fish. So, as soon as the hatch is in progress, then those fish will be mid column. They might be eating beta nymphs. They might be chasing the swimming betas, or they might be up closer to the top and keying on that pupa that's hanging right below the surface film.
Yeah. So in the wintertime, are you seeing decent hatches of midges then?
Pretty sporadic. It's
Okay.
like right now our water temperatures down on the Platte are about 35 degrees when we're starting out, and it's hard to find a feeding fish until the water gets up to close to 40 degrees. So, a few degrees swing in the water temperature can make a huge difference in the outcome of the day. But the hatches are sporadic. But once the hatch starts, then that's the time when you have to be able to capitalize on that opportunity, because the fish they're engaged and they're feeding on the pupa. So if you get a nice midge hatch, it's probably not a good idea to go eat lunch. You probably should focus on the and try to catch some fish, because it's this time of year anyway. It can be a short and sweet window.
Yeah. What time of day are you seeing midge hatches?
Oh, we usually, like, as a general rule, midge hatches are going to be the first hatch of the morning and the last hatch of the evening. That's generally what it is. But during the winter, you'll see some sporadic hatches even throughout the middle part of the day. But typically you get to the river and there's no midges, and then they start to come off, and then that's when you start going from larva patterns to pupa patterns.
Okay, interesting. Do you like a little sun on the water?
I do.
Okay.
I think the sun warms the water up, particularly this time of year, and I think we all could agree that, overcast days are probably better for fishing, better for hatches. But, I like the sun on the water because it gives me the opportunity to be able to sight fish. And, that's kind of revolves back around and determining whether or not I got a feeding fish or not.
Yeah. So are you mostly sight fishing when you're on Cheeseman?
We do a lot of sight fishing. It's
Okay.
really stacks the odds in your favor, when you can find fish and actively feeding fish. That's really an important part of being successful.
Give me an idea how you're spotting fish. So you're in this canyon. Are you just wading in the water looking, or do you kind of climb up above your angler and tell them where they are? What do you do?
The sight fishing is an acquired skill. It's just something that takes, a few years to master. And I pretty much know where the fish are going to be before I get there, just because I've fished that canyon all the time. And that's one of the challenges is, you have to know that water from 50 CFS all the way up to, 1500 CFS, and you can experience, a variety of flows. And there's certain sections of that canyon that fish well during higher flows, and there's certain sections that fish during lower flows. So you can't really get trapped in a rut and fish the same piece of water and over and enjoy success. So there's a lot of variables there. And then, of course, the fish, they're pretty predictable as far as where they hold during certain times of the year. And, winter they're going to be in the slower water, and summer they're going to be in the faster water. It's pretty predictable overall.
Super interesting. Do you struggle finding new trout streams to explore? Tired of stumbling around country roads looking for access points? Looking to escape the crowds? Then look no further, because Trout Routes has meticulously mapped and classified over 50,000 trout streams covering the entire lower 48, including 350,000 hand-curated public access points marked and ready for you to explore. I'm a huge fan of Trout Routes because they make it so easy to explore new trout waters. Many times, Trout Routes has helped me find new public water and get into fish fast. And the good folks at Trout Routes have been busy this winter making Trout Routes even better. Enter Stream Cards 2.0, the latest iOS release that brings together more info at your fingertips by organizing data like stream flows, access laws, nearest fly shops into easily accessible tabs for every river and stream in the app. And now you can check real-time stream height and flow rates with river data from stream gauges and compare those with historical data to spot trends. Pretty cool, huh? Planning a trip? Well, you'll love the advanced filter features that let you hone in on top-rated streams, boat ramps, camping spots, and more. So what are you waiting for? Start exploring today by downloading Trout Routes on your Apple or Android phone. So you wrote in a Fly Fisherman magazine I was reading to get ready for the show that the more difficult the terrain, the better the fishing. And I thought, why is that? What are you saying there? Do you remember writing that?
I'm not sure which one.
I think it was a tip.
Ross has been good to me, and he's allowed me to write in Fly Fisherman magazine for quite some time.
Yeah.
And he's been very kind and gave me a platform to share my passion. And I think, the difficult terrain definitely keeps a few people out. And, so you have to work a little bit harder to get into some of those places, like an 11-mile canyon, down around the tunnels there, the terrain is a little steeper. So it requires a little more effort to get in there. And, a lot of times pocket water is overlooked by anglers just because it's more difficult to negotiate and wade. But pocket water could be really good because the fish have to make their mind up really quick. So I think pocket water is targeting less pressured fish. And it's one of my go-to secrets.
You go after pocket water then, huh?
I love pocket water, especially, during the summer months. It's not very predictable during the winter. The fish are all huddled up in those winter lies in the slower, deeper pools. But times a year when I really enjoy fishing pocket water.
All right, I want to come back to that, but let's move on. Let's talk about some other tailwaters. What else comes to mind?
We're real fortunate to have the Dream Stream out there in Spinney, below Spinney Dam there, and then you've got 5 miles of river there with you have some resident fish in there. You've got some browns and some rainbows and some cutbows in there. And then you also toss in the migratory trout and you got the lake run fish to come out of 11 Mile in the spring, and you got the brown trout to come out of there in the fall. So you get those rainbows and those cuts coming in the spring, and opportunities to catch unusually big fish for for a short period of time. And the same thing takes place during the fall. You have some kokanee salmon that come up, and you have some brown trout come up. So, it's definitely gotten very popular. I think that's the time of year when it's really, really busy is when, those spawn runs are taking place.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Do you ever fish the lakes?
The only place that I fish a lot of lakes is down in Argentina, and I really enjoy fishing lakes in Argentina. But I don't fish many lakes here in Colorado. I'm more of a stream guy here.
Yeah, I heard it's good.
Yeah, I know Antero is an excellent still water impoundment, and so is Spinney, and 11 Miles good as well. And so a Tarryall Reservoir is a good still water impoundment. So we're fortunate out there in South Park that we've got some really good hatches, calabatus and damsels, and it's the chironomids and such. So if you're a lake angler, we got some really good waters there.
Do you ever fish any of those little streams that go all through South Park? I think of Michigan Creek's one of them. There's a couple like that, isn't there?
Yeah, there's some small streams out there. There's Jefferson Creek and Michigan Creek, and the one that I really like is Tarryall.
Yeah, I like that too.
The Tarryall Creek is awesome, and I just wrote a piece for Ross and Fly Fisherman about a year ago, actually, on the Tarryall and the new acquisition of some land out there that the Western Rivers I can't say
Conservancy. Yeah, I can't say it either.
They acquired some land and then they turned it over to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. So it was a big story and a big acquisition for the state.
Yeah, that's super cool. So that's the South Platte. And where else should we go in the state? What else sticks out in your mind?
Well, 11 Mile, you want to fish 11 Mile Canyon. We talked a little bit about that. So that's good. I've always loved the Blue River. It's a great tailwater, but it lost its gold medal designation recently. So the Blues had, its fair share of challenges, but I still absolutely love the Blue River. It's beautiful, and you got the scenic backdrop of that Gore Range, particularly down in the stretches down above Green Mountain Reservoir there. There's still enough fish in the Blue to keep it interesting. I always say you only need one fish at a time. So you have to work for them, particularly in that lower water, but it's lovely. And then you've got the tailwater up in town. So that's still is gold medal water in town.
In town?
Yeah, in town there in Silverthorne.
In Silverthorne, okay.
Yeah, and the Yampa, I like the Yampa Blow Stagecoach. That's a lovely little tailwater there. And then the Williams Fork tailwater is nice. Frying Pan is good. The Taylor River's good. So we've got a lot of nice tailwaters here.
Amazing. All right, so Williams Fork, is that the part of the Gunnison?
The Williams Fork is below Williams Fork Reservoir, so it's sometimes called the Williams Fork of the Colorado. So it's a tributary of the Colorado. So it's a fairly large reservoir. I don't think people realize how big the Williams Fork Reservoir is. It's actually bigger than Cheeseman Reservoir. It's about 98,000 acre feet. So it's a big lake, and it's a tailwater, and then about 1.5 miles, 2 miles of water there that funnels into the Colorado River right there at Partial.
Oh, at Partial. Okay, very good. What are the flows up there? How big is it?
It's a small stream. It's full at 100 CFS bank to bank.
Wow.
The thing that's interesting about that is it's a small stream, but it has a lot of gradient. So it's a fast moving stream, and anything over 300 CFS is not ideal on that river. And from time to time, that thing will get 500, 600, 800, during runoff on a big snowpack year. But the sweet spot is usually, like 100 to about 200 CFS is my favorite in there.
Yeah. What's the deal with the Blue? Why is it, you suppose it's dropped gold medal status?
I think, John Ewart, he's a great biologist. He's the same biologist that's on the Colorado. But the Blue is either seems like it's running 100 CFS or it's running 2,000 CFS. So it just seems like there's never a sweet spot on the Blue. I think part of it is the aquatic life. I think the reservoir is extremely cold. The hatches are sporadic, and I just think it's in the 80s it was a great river. I mean, I can remember having phenomenal days on the Blue River, and I'm not sure exactly why it's declined, but again, it's still one of the prettier rivers we have in the state, and you can still go catch fish on the Blue. It's just not, like it was in the old days.
Numbers are down a little bit. Do you have a per river mile, number of trout per river mile, like in Cheeseman versus the Blue and some of these other areas?
I couldn't tell you what the latest is, but to be gold medal, you got to have 60 pounds of trout per acre with 12 or more of those over 14 inches. So it's obviously less than that to have lost that designation, but it still has it in town. But Cheeseman kind of, it bounces around usually between, 4 and 5,500 fish per mile. It's a real healthy
Wow.
fishery. And Deckers 3 years ago was as high as 9,000 fish per mile. I know it's dropped off considerably from that and those, because I did a story for Fly Fisherman on that as well, just talking about how it switched from mainly a rainbow trout fishery to a brown trout fishery, and the numbers were way up. And so Ross wanted me to do a story on that, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the numbers are down. We had a flash flood in there a couple summers ago, and I think it's really affected the habitat and the fishing in there as well.
Yeah, the flash flood went all the way through Cheeseman too, didn't it?
Yep, I went through Cheeseman and Deckers, and we were very fortunate last year that we got a high water year. We hadn't had a high water year in 10 years.
Uh-huh.
So the timing was ideal. It was a miracle, just a real blessing that we got that big water year, because it moved a lot of that sediment out. So
Okay. So the flood brought the mud in, but then you had a high water year that washed a lot of it out the next year.
yeah, it mainly decomposed granite coming off the hillsides that were burned out from the Haigh fire back in 2002.
Wow. You wrote an article about this, didn't you, right after it happened in Fly
Yep.
Fisherman? Yeah.
Yeah, it was. It was last year. I was traveling the country and kind of down and out about the canyon, and now this year everybody's asking me about it, and I've got good news to report that that high water did some good and did some flushing, and we're not out of the woods yet. I mean, we need another good water year this year. Our snowpack's right around 100%, so I think that we're gonna be good. I think we're gonna have another great year of water.
Good to hear. Talk about the frying pan a little bit.
The frying pan's always been one of those really phenomenal dry fly fisheries. Great PMDs, great drakes, great olives, great red quills, and known as kind of a big fish tailwater.
Yeah.
The blue, the frying pan, and the tailor have the mysa shrimp in them. So those are a little crustacean that grows very big fish. They were planted in the reservoir to fatten up the kokanee salmon initially, but that kind of backfired, and it didn't work out like they expected it to. But those shrimp were coming through the tail race, and so that's where you get that the allure of those really big fish is on the frying pan, and especially up in that upper section. There's some big fish that are eating those shrimp.
The toilet bowl, I think they call it.
Yep, toilet bowl, main bowl, and all the way down to the bridge run. There is that's kind of where the biggest concentration. Those bigger fish are going to be in that first half mile below the dam, on the blue or on the tailor or on the frying pan. But the frying pan it's pretty famous. I mean,
Yeah.
John Garrick and A.K. Best, always fished over there, and it just it's a great dry fly fishery, like I said, and it's a phenomenal nymph fishery. Particularly sight fishing some of those bigger fish up closer to the dam.
You could see them then.
Yep.
Those big guys. Wow.
Yep, water's clear, and you got great sight fishing possibilities up there, like a lot of the other tailwaters too.
So you wrote a book about fly fishing tailwaters. Would you say there's a whole bunch of things that are similar across all tailwaters, but are there nuances? You're talking about the mysis shrimp, so obviously that's a different pattern. But are you doing different techniques on different tailwaters for different reasons?
When I always travel the country, I mean, I open up my talk with that. I say, that there's a lot of tailwaters in the West, and they all support a very healthy population of fish and a good aquatic life, but they do. All of them have some nuances that make them a little different from one another. But as a general rule, a tailwater is a tailwater, and the tactics and techniques that you apply on one tailwater will generally work on just about any tailwater, and that's the beautiful thing about me. Growing up and fishing Cheeseman, I was able to apply a lot of the things that I had learned on that tail race to other tail races. Now, I mean, it just depends. Some of the hatches are a little different, and some tailwaters generate power. So, you go to like Lee's Ferry, they're generating power, and some of the eastern tailwaters, in eastern Tennessee, they're generating power. So that's where some of the tailwaters vary. In Colorado, we're more of a deep bottom release tailwaters, and we're not generating a lot of power. We're basically, with the reservoirs that we have, the big stillwater impoundments they're trying to provide downstream demand to cities, for fruit growers and crops, and it varies. The flow varies a lot, and that's one of the more difficult things about tailwater is just the flows vary. They're up and down based on downstream demand.
Yeah. And it's a lot of ag then, the downstream demand in Colorado. Is it mostly cities?
Yeah, I mean, it's look at Denver for instance. I mean, it's bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
It's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's more need for water. And but Denver Water has done an impeccable job of trying to balance the fishery as well as supply water. And at the end of the day, these tail races, they're just a water conduit, and fishing is a byproduct of the water conduit in the city of Denver trying to supply water to the city and the outlying areas. So
Yeah.
but you get real used to when it's hot, the flows are going to go up. If it's dry, the chances are going to be higher. If you get a nice big rain shower or something like that, oftentimes they'll drop the flow back down because there's no demand. So you get used to working around the weather patterns. You figure it out in time.
Okay. Is it a sudden jump like it is, on some of like down in the White River in Arkansas or some of the things in Tennessee? Does it jump up quickly or is it more gradual?
Most of the tailwaters in Colorado are pretty gradual. You don't see any major. You might see them bump at 100 CFS or 200 CFS, but it's not like you say when you're out on the Watauga or the South Holston where they blow the horn and all of
Get
a
out of the
sudden
water, man.
3 feet and it becomes a
Yeah.
safety concern. So I mean, as a general rule, when they release water, and we really don't know when they're going to release water. It's just you get a hunch, like I said, but it's not like back east where you can look at the regimens, the water when they're going to release. You can't do that here. We don't have any idea. We have to just kind of think that they're going to, for if it's been hot and dry and they need the water. And
Yeah.
like you said, if you get an inch of rain, and then they'll typically drop her back because there's no reason to move water because everything's already been wet and sufficient rainfall.
Okay. Let's talk about the Taylor for a minute. That flows into the Gunnison then, is that correct?
Yeah, so you've got the East River, which is a freestone, and then you have the Taylor River, and those two they meet at the small community of Almont. And so from those two rivers, the confluence of the Taylor River and the East River, then from there down, that's the Gunnison River, and the Gunnison River flows about 30 miles down to Blue Mesa Reservoir, which is the biggest stillwater impoundment in the state of Colorado. And then, of course, below Blue Mesa, you've got the Gunnison Gorge, and that's known for being some really, really good stonefly activity in there. The salmon fly hatch in the Gunnison Gorge is something that all diehard anglers should experience
Is that
that.
right?
Yeah,
Okay.
good. But back to the Taylor, the Taylor's, I grew up, because it's in the Gunnison Valley, fished it a lot with my dad, a lot of dry flies, a lot of tractor dry flies. So it's always special. And then you've got that upper section, like the blue in the pan, where you've got the bigger fish because of the mysis component to the fishery. But the Taylor's 20 miles long, and
Wow.
10 miles of it's open to the public. So there's plenty of public access. You just have to make sure the boundaries of the private water and the public access points.
Okay. Are any of these streams, would you say they're easier to fish or are they all pretty technical?
Uh, I, they're all pretty technical, just they're similar in so many ways with the really cold water and the clear water and the smaller bugs. The Taylor River has got an interesting component to it just because it's difficult to wade. It's slick. It's one of the slicker rivers in the state. I mean, it's a tough one to wade. It's like walking around on a bunch of greased bowling balls.
Oh, man.
But I don't know. Like I said, I grew up fishing that with Dad, and it's an amazing fishery. And it's the scenic view in the Taylor Canyon is incredible. It's just
Oh,
a lot of those beautiful deep pools and pocket water and riffle runs. It's a beautiful, beautiful canyon.
that sounds awesome. I've never been down there. Got to make a trip. Okay, so just at a high level, tailwaters versus freestone. What are so we understand what's going on with the tailwaters coming off the bottom of a lake typically, but why does that change up the fishing game so much?
Well, when you look at a tailwater, the beautiful thing is you've got a stillwater impoundment. When people, they run down to Deckers and they just go fishing and they go, wow, this is a great fishery and Cheeseman's a great fishery, but they don't ever really think about why it's a great fishery.
Yeah.
So you've got this stillwater impoundment, and it stratifies into three distinct life zones. And so during the winter, you've got the warmest water that comes off the base of the dam, and then it flips over and re-stratifies. They call it lake turnover, and that happens every spring and every fall. And then you get during the summer months, the coldest water comes off the base. So it's really, there's a paradox there. So, and another thing, even furthermore, is during the winter that comes out about 40 degrees, and as it moves away from the tail race, it gets colder. But during the summer months, it comes out at 40 degrees, and as it moves away from the tail race, it gets warmer. So those are variables that can affect it. And then the ongoing question is always is how long is a tailwater a tailwater? Often people want to know that. And I say generally about 10 miles is what you can bank on, because feeder streams come in, things get more diversified, they're quantified life wise. And, it just gets warmer as it moves downstream. But that's what makes the tailwater so reliable. It's a year-round fishery because of the stratification of the lake. So, it's a man-made impoundment that really dictates how the fishery reacts.
Yeah.
And then you compare it to a freestone. Freestones are consistently inconsistent. You get a nice rain shower on the Gunnison River and it muddies up. It can be very low in the spring, very low in the fall. It can be frozen in the winter, and it can be blown out during the height of runoff.
Yeah.
It's a completely different animal.
Do freestones typically have a wider variety of bugs?
They tend to be, a little bit more diverse. I like freestones, because they're typically going to have, golden stoneflies. A lot of them have, the salmon flies, some bigger mayflies, red quills, green drakes. Some of your tailwaters, like the frying pan, have green drakes, but most of the tailwaters we concentrate on what we call the big three, and that's your blue-wing olives, your pale morning duns, and your tricos. Those are the three most important mayflies on tailwaters as a general rule. But the freestones, you get the drake hatch, and you get the red quill hatches, and tailwaters are very, very healthy. They have great caddis hatches sometimes too. They get yellow sallies, and they're a little different. You got one is unregulated. The freestones are unregulated, and the tailwaters are just more predictable because of the releases.
Right, and then you've got the midges as well. In another form of, it's not a mayfly, it's a midge. So
right, midges are very important in tail races. Very, very. I mean, they'll make up about 50% of a trout's diet.
Huh. So if trout are eating these tiny little midges, they got to be feeding all the time, or a lot.
I always tell people what midges lack in size, they make up in numbers.
Yeah.
So they're eating lots and lots and lots of midges.
Are they an easy target for a trout? I mean, do they swim fast? Are they hard for a trout to catch? Or
they're pretty easy, actually. I mean, when a midge, I always tell people, familiarize yourself with the life cycle of a midge. You want to understand, about the larvas, and they're typically a pale olive and a red color, and then your pupas are typically shades of brown and black. But when they pupate, they typically hang in the surface film, and they look like a C. They kind of hang like this, and so those fish will spin, and they'll just move back and forth, and they'll eat those midge pupa. So they can eat a lot of midges with very little effort.
Okay, yeah, and I've been on some tailwaters where the difference was some guys I was fishing with were fishing with a midge, a pupa on a straight hook versus a curved hook.
Right.
And they caught a dozen fish, and I caught one because I didn't have a straight hook. I had them all on scud hooks.
Gotcha.
Does that sound, or was I just having a bad day?
I think that I tie, midge pupa on both. I would say I probably catch more of my trout on a curved hook than a straight hook.
Yeah.
I tie like a little Mercury Black Beauty on a straight hook, but my top secret midge is on a curved hook. But I don't know. I think the curved hook is probably more representative of the pupa itself, just because of the way it hangs there, right below the surface film.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now here's something you wrote. This was a Fly Fishing Magazine article on tailwaters. Okay. So I don't know how many you've written on tailwaters, but you said that some of my biggest revelations have come from thinking outside of the box. And I'm wondering, what does that mean? How are you thinking outside of the box?
There's times when the bite just is off, or, and then you throw something big and gaudy. You might throw a leech or a big crane fly, or, you're down there and you're having a good morning, and all of a sudden, the flow comes up and now the water's dirty. So, you've got to fish, a crane fly larva or possibly a pink San Juan worm or a chamois leech or something to try to save the day. Sometimes that's what's frustrating, is the variables that you can't control, like a flow increase. Those are the kind of things. And then there's times like they just got lockjaw. The bite's off, and that's when you, like you say, you think outside the box, and those fish are accustomed to eating small midges and small mayflies, and you throw a big leech in there, and and you get a nice grab. Got a
And
fish
you might get one.
Yeah, that's eaten opportunistically. And you think about, I mean, as a general rule, smaller is always better. Think about how many times or how many midges it equals one bait fish, or how many midges it equals, for one leech. So,
Right.
and I've learned, I learned some really good, valuable lessons just fishing with like guides like Steve Henderson, over on the Yampa, and figuring out that you can still do pretty good with streamers in the middle of the winter, and I was always kind of tended to shy away from fishing streamers in the winter, and I didn't think that they would eat a streamer, but little did I find out, if you fish the right water with the right retrieve, you can still catch fish with streamers in the winter.
Is that right? Super slow. What do you do?
Yeah, just a real slow, retrieve and fishing, those slower tailwaters, and you're basically looking for a fish that's kind of, just wants to attack something. It's having a bad day,
Right.
take advantage of a big bite.
Drop a big chunk of meat on their face, and they can't help themselves sometimes. What do you do differently when maybe you're the third guy in a pool on Cheeseman? It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, I usually don't worry about coming in behind somebody.
Oh, you don't?
I feel like I'll be dialed in, and not to be cocky or overconfident, it's but a lot of times it's the weight management, and the indicator management that really plays an important role in that. And I think you can come in and you can get it. Every hole has to be dialed in a little differently to be successful. So you're right. I mean, a lot of times the one fella leaves a hole and another one steps in, and so those fish, they're getting a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But, going smaller with your flies, going lighter tippets, than the average fella, that makes a big difference. I think you just gotta bring the A game and bring the small bugs and the light tippets.
Well, that's a wrap on part 1 of this 2-part series. Thank you, folks, for listening. Be sure to check out the Destination Angler show notes and exclusive pictures of some of these destinations Pat was talking about today, along with his top flight picks on our Facebook and Instagram pages. You can DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shaig@destinationanglerpodcast.com. And if you like the show, please share it with a buddy. As always, our music is by Brothers Fountain, a really cool little band out of Fort Collins, Colorado. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again soon for part 2 with Pat Dorsey. Tight lines, everybody.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.